see are compostable. Hopefully we're working to be more and more green. So I appreciate that everybody who did that and continue to do that if you can. So anybody who did not sign up, there are sign-up sheets here with instructions about and outline about the program. So if anybody wants one, I'll have them up on the front table. Or you need one? Okay. And the emails, I think, a new list will come out with all the new emails and hopefully update everything. Sure. Okay. Super. I would like to say one thing. I think two other quick things. One, it was very appropriate today that we had the song "Come to the Water," because our topic today, to be given, is on what? We're trying to again get environmentally conscious, and I'd like to just start off with a little quote from the encyclical Laudato Si from Pope Francis. Laudato Si, mi Signore, praise be to you, my Lord. In the words of this beautiful canticle, St. Francis of Assisi reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us and who produces various fruits with colored flowers and herbs. This sister now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods which God has endowed them. We have come to see ourselves as her lords and masters, entitled to plunder her at will. The violence present in our heart, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. This is why the earth herself, burdened and laid waste, is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor, as she quotes, groans in travail from Romans. We have forgotten that we ourselves are the dust of the earth, as in Genesis. Our very bodies are made up of her elements. We breathe her air, and we receive life and refreshments from her waters. On that note, I'm going to reintroduce, if you remember, Kara Quigley, who spoke to us last year. She's going to speak on water. Kara.
That was read at the Parliament of World Religions, which is what I'm going to be talking mostly about today. Two housekeeping. So there's two subjects I can speak on next time. Number one, I can speak on breath and meditation, which I am a breath and meditation coach. Number two, I can speak on school shootings. I am a daughter of a school shooter, and I can shed light in ways many people, at least I think I'm the only person that can shed light on the subject in that way, at least. Both are very important talks. We won't get through life very well if you don't know how to meditate. I can be pretty honest about that. And we're also not going to solve the problem of school shootings unless we confront it head on and face it. When I was at Parliament and gave my talk, a woman said, "What are you giving a talk on next?" I said, "Well, I'm giving a talk on school shootings." And she said, "Oh, I can't. And I said, "Then we won't." So it's pretty important to face your breath and face our problems. So it's your choice. It's up to a vote. I'm happy to do either or. Both are equally important. Are we okay with that? Can everybody hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome.
Excuse me, Kara. We can just take a vote when Kara's finished. Is that all right?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So I think last time I may have let everyone know, it's not going to work, that I am a spiritual humanist, and often people want to know what that entails. Well, I can't say for sure that it's always going to be one thing that keeps me going. I will tell you that right now, this is my new religion, the elements. They give to us freely without asking anything back. They continue to give and have given since their inception. This is what we're made of. It never stops. And they don't get tired. So I think for me, I'm going to do my best to learn a lot more about the elements. I got some flashcards, and hopefully I can memorize them. I was fortunate enough to speak 3 times at the 2018 Parliament of World Religions in Toronto. If you don't know the history, this was the 7th Parliament that has ever happened. They began in 1893 in Chicago, at the Chicago World's Fair. The 2nd Parliament was 100 years later. So we never know when they're going to happen, but we've been fortunate enough to have 7 of them. I've been to 2. And my talk today reflects my experiences and the information I learned at Parliament, but only one section of what I learned. I'm going to just be talking about the one subject as opposed to the 50 others that I also learned. Not many people are happy about this talk. I've had a few people walk out. I promise you this will be challenging. You might learn some things you didn't know, although we've been pretty well informed by Greta Thunberg over the last 2 weeks with her fabulous speeches at the UN on the climate crisis. You could hear from 40 different people who attended Parliament, and they would give you 40 different stories. It is so vast. There were 8,300 people in attendance from 120 different countries and 80 different faiths. It is too big to put here all today, and even though I'm going to gab on and on and on, I won't be able to ever tell you everything that happened. If you get on my Facebook page between the dates of November 1st and 8th of last year, you'll find all of my experiences at Parliament. And certainly if you look up different hashtags for Parliament in your search engines, all of these things will come up and you can see other people's stories. So I'm going to begin by introducing myself the way that you introduce yourself at Parliament. I am Kara Bechtel, the daughter of Robert and Beverly Bechtel and sister to Amanda Willis. I was born by the Missouri River, but raised by the dry wash of the Rito River in Tucson, Arizona. On my mother's side, I come from a long line of Norwegian women who came to Lamoni, Iowa in 1842. My father's side of the family, from Ireland and Switzerland, came over in the 1600s and settled in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So I am most definitely Pennsylvania Dutch from the Schuylkill River. I am now back at the Missouri River and have been here since 2003 with a brief spell in Dublin by the River Liffey, and then Belfast by the River Login, where I became a mother. My daughter is a child of the River Login. I come from a long line of opinionated women, and one very particularly strong woman, my father's mother, who taught me to be grateful, no matter what, even when the worst of the worst happens. And I can assure you, she knew the worst of the worst. My father's transgressions and lessons and enlightenment are in me, and my mother's unconditional love and ability to let me grow without strict boundaries has allowed me to be myself, which in turn gave me the freedom to change my name to Quigley, my father's mother's maiden name, because I could no longer grow inside the name Quigley, and so I am Kara Quigley. I had signed up at Parliament to receive a certificate in Indigenous Cultural Awareness, which meant I had to get 8 hours under my belt in this week of Indigenous lectures and workshops and ceremonies. And I thought by day 1 this would be completely easy. I just had to attend 1 a day, no problem. So we start with the opening fire ceremony, and this is where everyone gathers from all over the world who happen to be there for the opening ceremony. So you don't really get the full scope of everybody, but certainly there's enough leaders there by now. I was standing next to African Zulu priests on one side, a priest from Dublin, Catholic priest on the other side. There were Mormon leaders. There were Indian swamis across the way. There were people from all the indigenous tribes of North America, and we all gathered round at this fire to begin the Parliament. Here's some of the people I saw across the fire. This is Francois Paulette. It's kind of hard to find people from Native American tribes of North America who are willing to be the spokesperson for all the tribes. They don't like that. It's not about that for them, and so they always kind of preface it by saying, well, here's what I would say, and I would invite anyone else to say something else if they could. But Francois Paulette talked about his experiences over the years at the 6 parliaments that he's attended and how they have changed. In this particular time, he's talking about how his first parliament, everyone was trying to convert him to Christianity. And now at this parliament, he gets to walk around saying, you can learn what I know so I can save you. So the tribal leader from Hawaii, I don't have a picture of her, I'll get to this man in just a second. She chanted her introduction in her native language, and she reminded us that the word in Hawaiian for water is wealth. And so she grew up knowing that Hawaiians were the richest people in the world. Some other people that were there was this Swami Agnivesh. I have his book here. I met Swami Agnivesh for the first time in 2002 at Union Theological Seminary, back when I thought I was going to be a minister. And he did his own Hindu fire ceremony in St. James Chapel on the Union campus. It was the first Hindu ceremony ever performed there. And when he gave his speech, he said, "All of you people who think you're all about nonviolence, you think you're such pacifists, I want you to look at what you're wearing. Where did those clothes come from and who made them? I want you to look at your plates. Where did that food come from and how did it get there? And I want you to think about what you say to yourself." Because most of us are wearing violence, eating violence, and speaking violence to ourselves at all times. If you are truly a person of nonviolence, you need to be very careful about everything you do. And that has always stuck with me. And finally, when I met him again, I had forgotten his name, and I did every search you could possibly imagine to find a Swami who spoke at Union in 2002. I couldn't find him, and then I see him, and I thought, that's the guy! So I went up to him, and we hugged, and he was really, really gracious and wonderful, and I told him that I remembered that, and he said, "I said that?" I said, "Yes, you did." He said, "That's really good," and I said, "Yes, it is." This is Grand Chief Wilton Littlechild. He's of the Cree tribe. He and Justin Trudeau worked very closely together for the Truth and Reconciliation Committee for the school program of Canada, in which a number, pretty much 100% of the Native American children were stolen from their homes and put into public education in Canadian public schools. They have since tried to heal this wound and have been quite successful. At one point in this program, there was a 65% mortality rate for the children because they would often try to escape in the winter and freeze in the woods trying to find their way back to their tribe. Many of them were transported 2,000 miles away from their home and not told where they were going. It's a very dark period in Canadian history, and I might add American history as well. And this man did just such a marvelous job explaining truth and reconciliation and what the committee has to do. I think one of the things I took away from this is that what's the word? Recommendation doesn't work. The word recommendation is the most ignored word in any report given to how to heal a community. The word you have to use is action. Here's the action we must take. Recommendation doesn't work, it's not firm enough, and it will most likely be ignored. Parliament is a tour de force even for a religion junkie. Even though I was being fed constantly, going to every booth I could, every lecture I could, I got an average of 4 hours sleep a night. I skipped many meals and was shoving power bars in my mouth trying to get to another lecture. It was deliciously overwhelming, and my brain was exploding just about every half hour. This is the lodge, and this is the indoor lodge that they built where all Native American or Indigenous programming took place. When I say Indigenous, I mean the Native people of any country from around the world that would come and give their talks here. It's built pretty much in sort of what we would call rules and regulations in our language, according to what they need to have the best efficacy for their ceremonies. So there were times when certain people could not attend. For instance, women on their menstrual cycle, they had to be able to sit back outside of the lodge because according to many customs, that would be unclean for them to sit so close to the fire. They reserved the seats closest to the fire for elders of tribes, and everyone else would sit further away. And this all made sense when it came to the ceremonies and what they had to do. And certainly, elders piping up time and time again throughout certain lectures to add their things that they needed to say. And as the days ticked by, it seemed the only programming left for my Indigenous certificate had to do with water. This was not my plan. I thought 8 hours would be easy, but it became incredibly impossible by day 3 that I hadn't had any Indigenous programming so far. I am not a water person. It does not hold my interest at all. Even though I was born under the astrological sign of Cancer, I am not into water. I choose mountain vacations and cities to disappear into. Cruises are probably my worst nightmare, and bathing suits are an insult to my very soul. I am not a water person. A calm lake, I understand that. The sound of ocean waves, I get that too. I'll do that. A babbling brook, a roaring river, I can do that too, but I would much prefer Banff, Canada than the Caribbean, and I'd take an adventure through Bangkok rather than languishing, bored to death on the French Riviera. Besides, I'm from Arizona. It's the land of no water. People always talked about the underground water in Arizona, the lack of rain. In 7th grade science class, I had to calculate how many gallons were left in the underground reservoir in Tucson, just about the most boring thing I ever did. In my freshman year in high school, we had to do an essay on water scarcity, and I asked the teacher if I might write my own essay on the subject of my choosing, and she said, "What would that be?" And I said, "Rock and roll." And she said, "Okay, go ahead," and rolled her eyes. She gave me a C on my essay, but then submitted the essays to the Masons Lodge, and I got #1 in the entire city. So I told her a thing or two about rock and roll. I also beat out 2 valedictorians, so that was nice. So, as I've explained, water was not the most captivating subject for me, so I sat and took notes. I wasn't going to let the $125 I spent to get the Indigenous Programming Certificate go to waste. I just decided I'm here for a reason. I'm going to sit and learn. Isaac Day, there's a ceremony being prepared here. Isaac Day, an Ojibwe from the Serpent River First Nation, was running a seminar on the creation of love. And he's standing next to Grandmother Flotomayor from Guatemala, a native of indigenous tribes in Guatemala. He talked about water being love. And this was something that was mentioned at the 2015 Parliament in Salt Lake City, so this wasn't anything new to me, but I thought I'd write it down again just to get it in there. One of the elders piped up and laughed, and he said, "Well, you can't have life without love." And I thought, that's actually quite true. And so I wrote that down. And then I went to a lecture on the goddess Saraswati, one of a pretty major goddess in the Hindu pantheon. She's the goddess of wisdom, music, and art. Dr. Elizabeth M. Rollman of the University of Calgary, her mastery of ancient Sanskrit is unbelievable. She was asked to write the chapter on Saraswati for the Oxford Dictionary of Hinduism, a pretty big honor for a white woman from the West. She talked about the birth of Saraswati and that Saraswati began as a river. And so I wrote that down too. I attended an interview with Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood refused to talk about her literature and only wanted to talk about the climate crisis. Her parents were biologists. So in the 1950s when she was having dinner, these conversations we're having now about the environment were something that was totally done all the time in her house in the 1950s. She reminded us that 60% of our global oxygen supply is in the ocean. If the oceans die, and they are doing that right now, then we will die. Only it will be very slow, and we will get stupid first. And she said, I think that might be happening right now. If water dies, we die.
Stupid first.
Dr. Jonathan Granoff, one of my favorite Parliament people, he moved me to tears in his talk with Jane Goodall about nuclear disarmament. This was at the 2015 Parliament. He and Jane Goodall put together a panel on nuclear weapons. He knows where all 17,000 warheads in the entire world are. He has stories that will chill you to the bone. He knows how close we've come to mistakes and accidental launches and ways in which we've had to cover things up as not to cause a panic. I don't know how he sleeps at night, but he does. He's part of the UN, I think it's the Security Council UN, if I'm not, I might be getting that wrong, but he has a lot to do with Global Security Institute, maybe that's what he said, at the UN. He is partnered with the Parkland children to talk to them about violence in America. It's not enough to remove the guns, he explains to them. You have to get to the heart of where violence exists in our culture. The inception of our country has a lot to do with violence. He told me that violence is everything. It's in our Constitution, it's in our families, it's in the founding of this nation, it's in capitalism, it's in everything. We are a people of violence. And then we laughed and hugged and I walked my own way away, as a typical conversation of Parliament. I began to hum the national anthem as I walked away from Dr. Granoff, and I thought to myself, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, a song I have been taught to cry to by my culture, a song about war, a song sung before every sporting event where the military shows up to hold the flag. I kept thinking about the ways in which violence come through my world without me even noticing. And Margaret Atwood said something that I also heard Phyllis Curot say. Phyllis is a high priestess. She developed her own order. I think it's the Oracle of Ara. She's also a lawyer for pagan and indigenous rights because they often overlap. All the problems of the world, both Atwood and Curot said, are due to gender inequality. I began to trace it all back and realized that because of patriarchal structure, which is quite global, that this wasn't in fact true. Vandana Shiva, an agricultural protester from India, reminded us that overpopulation isn't happening because women want to have babies. It is happening because of injustice toward women. Overpopulation is about the injustice and belief systems that rule many cultures. Agricultural waste and pollution by capitalistic predatory companies, where women do not work for the most part and therefore have no leverage or voice in them, continue to cause economic inequality and environmental degradation. Religion, one of the most unequal places for religion across the world. And bonus, all that religious stuff gets written down, therefore thought of as permanent. Women also lack education because in many cultures, once you begin menstruating, you stop going to school. She reminds us about how we plant our crops in monoculture. One way of doing things is exemplified in planting only one seed, acre by acre by acre. Where we have monocultured the fields, we have also monocultured our minds. And those of us that use fossil fuels, we have quite possibly fossilized our minds. I wrote all of this down. It was my third time I've seen Vandana Shiva. She never disappoints. I still had more Indigenous programming to get through, so back to the lodge I went, and this lecture was about water. My head was literally swimming with thoughts and stories about droughts and floods. I took more notes. I learned more about water. I thought about my talk with Dr. Jonathan Granoff. I heard the voices of the many speakers echoing in my mind. Many of my heroes that I got to meet. Karen Armstrong, Selena Fox, who is an amazing pagan priestess. She runs these incredible festivals up in Wisconsin. She was there for the first Earth Day, and she marched with Martin Luther King across the Selma Bridge. This is Gandhi's grandson. I was able to meet him and explain to him that while my father was serving a life sentence, he read the works of Gandhi and Martin Luther King and was liberated within his mind. And we both began to cry, and he reached in and grabbed me in for a hug. It was an incredible moment, full circle, that our DNA could actually meet each other. This is Bob Goulet and Trina Foyen. They were much of the MCs for Indigenous programming when it was on the big stage. I began to think about their Selena Fox and her tribe. They are just incredible. Here's a gentleman from the Amazon. So I began to think about our violent past and how it was indeed our violent present, the genocidal way in which we inserted ourselves onto the global stage, continued our legacy of scorched earth and expendable humanity, using everything up in our path. Our American dream was the world's nightmare. I had heard all of this before, but it resonated with me as I walked the halls in a much deeper way. Our trash and consumption is the dictator of the world, we who seem to be anti-dictator. I needed some relief. I thought, as a secular theologian, I would take in a good old-fashioned interfaith panel called Faith in the Earth. That would do the trick. The title was innocuous enough. It had all the big wigs, and it was going to be a good variety. I was ready for some theology and philosophy. It was a packed room. The energy was positive and affirming. We had Vandana Shiva, Swami Pujachanand Saraswati, and his student, Sadhvi Bhakti Saraswati, these two here. She got her PhD, she was getting her PhD research in Rishikesh, and she never left. And now she basically lives at the ashram and feeds the poor all day and does Vedanta philosophy lectures. She's wonderful. Michael Bernard Beckwith, some of you may know him from the Unity World, and Rabbi David Rosen, if you've never seen him speak, you should. He's pretty incredible. And Mohinder Singh, he's a Sikh leader. Sadhvi Bhagwati got up to speak. She gets up to the microphone and she says, I'd like to talk about water. So I dutifully took notes. There was a big sigh for me in the audience, and then I was completely blown away. Everything that was being spoken about I had heard before, but there was something about this tone that was completely different. It made these facts seem more prescient. Sadhvi had the floor. According to the UN, 3.2 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions per year are from animal agriculture. According to the UN, by 2040, we will have half the water we need to survive on the planet. 1 pound of beef is the same amount of water as if you bathed every day for 6 months. Are you willing to refrain from bathing for 6 months for a pound of beef? This is not about shame or guilt, she reminded us. This is about empowerment. 10 to 16 pounds of grain go into 1 pound of beef. By eating 1 pound of beef, you are saying you deserve the food of 15 other people. People say there is a global food shortage, but we grow enough grain in the US to give 2 loaves of bread every single day to every person on the planet. There is no shortage. We create the shortage, we create poverty, we create hunger. What we eat and how we eat it is making the rest of the world hungry and causing our planet to die. There is no shortage of food, there is only a global consciousness shortage. Vandana Shiva got up to speak. The chemicals of war became the chemicals of food. The Zyklon B company responsible for poisoning the Jews in the gas chambers at Auschwitz diversified after World War II and became a chemical company. The tools of genocide are now being converted into tools of ecocide and further genocide. Agent Orange, the second product of the fabulous company of Monsanto, the first being the fabulous DDT, was converted into Roundup. The chemicals of war become the chemicals of food, and now agriculture and food scarcity are the new war. Do you understand that? War never ended, we just put it into food. In the last few decades, Living Planet reports 60% of all species will be gone, 83% of all freshwater species are gone, 93% of cultivated diversity is gone. Factory farming, grazing animals that were not designed to eat grain are sucking up the food for the world. Species extinction is now 1,000 times its natural rate. The UN reports from the Living Planet of the Biodiversity Panel, animal agriculture and land use are the single biggest source of species extinction. 40% of the climate crisis is due to animal agriculture. And please do me a favor. It's not global warming, it's not climate change, it is the climate crisis. We've already changed, it's the crisis now. Please correct that. Nature, Vandana Shiva says, deprives no one of food. We do not produce food, the earth does. How we eat and distribute determines the future of the planet and the future of all humanity. Michael Bernard Beckwith got up to speak and close it up. When I drive home from work, he said, I drive past McDonald's, Wendy's, and Kentucky Fried Chicken. I call this the new death row. As I looked at Toronto, so this is Swami Chinand, he's the teacher of Sadhvi. These are all people taking vows to be vegan. They probably lasted about 2 weeks. And this is where the fire ceremony was, and this is what you looked out on from the windows of the building. Vandana Shiva was so gracious to give me a photo with her at the very end. She must have been exhausted. She was quite incredible. Here's the ending ceremony. So there's some rules when you're dealing with Indigenous people. Once you gather in a circle, everyone has to get a hug at the end. And you might think it'd be fun to hug 200 people, but by 125 we were all in tears because you just get that vulnerable, embracing people time and time and time again. It's this incredible exercise of love between people from all over the world. 200 people. Here's my sage and pine and tobacco to throw into the fire, and they allowed me to take a picture of the ashes. You can't take a picture of the fire, so that was quite wonderful. As I looked at Toronto from the backseat of my Uber, I waved goodbye. I wondered what would be the thing I would think about, what would be the great lesson that would crystallize these 8 days. And when I turned back around and faced forward so I could look at the freeway, the only thing that came to me was water is life. How boring. I couldn't believe that I was thinking about water, and it really made me mad. Couldn't there be something more interesting I could talk about? And over the next few weeks, I had some panic. I lost a lot of sleep. By 2040, we will have half the water we need to survive on the planet, and I couldn't get it out of my body enough to even take that in. We have 12 years to turn this around. It's funny because I wrote this speech in December, and by the time we get to the UN last week, we only have 8.5 years. That's how fast it's going, because the carbon is coming out of the ice as it melts. So we're dumping more carbon just by the melting itself. And the United States hasn't really done much to curb carbon emissions at all. My vodka intake increased. I definitely was into the 3 martini lunches, and I still couldn't sleep that well. I had what you could call a bona fide nervous breakdown. There had to be something earth-shattering, something that would make a great talk, a new philosophy never discovered before. I could write a good book. What would be my talk? If I could just get water out of the way, then I could find something better. And so I waited and I stewed and I pouted and I tossed and I turned and I drank more martinis, and the only thing that would come to me is that water is life. It is a scientifically and spiritually proven fact. Life is love. If it's not, go to a therapist. What that guy said was true. You can't have life without love. When you learn how to love, love becomes life. If life is love, then water is love, just like Isaac Day said. Water, life, love. It drove me mad like some Edgar Allan Poe line following me like a heavy footstep down a dark alley in the night. Water, life, love. Water, life, love. Water, life, love. And then, like any religious studies major having an existential crisis, it dawned on me. That's a trinity. A trinity. Maybe the original trinity, maybe the one before religion. We came from water. We can't live without water. And in 20 years, we will have half the water we need to survive on the planet. So I have to ask then, do we want to live? Do we value our lives? And I thought more and more. Water comes in 3 forms: liquid, vapor, and solid. And so as a religion major, I had to ask, is this the original Trinity? Because this was very visible to people before religion. I also began to connect that water was always seen as feminine. It was the women at the well. Aquarius was the water gatherer. The goddess Sarasvati began as a river. The sirens in the Greek myths luring men into the ocean. Women are still the water gatherers in the greater portion of the world. When your water breaks, your baby is born. Water is life. The moon, considered feminine, controls the tides. The Hawaiian word for water is wealth. A word I learned at Parliament, a word I'd never heard before. There's water as a woman. This little word is called gendercide. I am upset I never knew about it, but I wish I didn't know about it. Gendercide refers to the 100 million women never born into the world because of 20-week abortions in countries that value male lives over female lives. Remember that fact that I kept tossing around in my mind, that all the problems in the world are due to gender inequality? It took me a while to think about how that's possible and then realize it actually was. It starts in the womb. 100 million women are never born. What is that doing to the planet's balance? The Earth is trying to create balance, and we keep throwing that balance off. If we treat women better, will we treat water better? Very often the way we treat women is the way we treat water. If water is a she, and water is also who we are, then she is in all of us. Why do we fear our own balance inside of ourselves? I began to have visions of our biological ancestors making their way out of the water, growing legs, and eventually becoming the upright apes that we are today. Realizing we are 2/3 water, the earth is 2/3 water. We are the fingerprints of the ocean left on the sand. We are not of the earth, we are of the ocean. We are water, interrupted at times with bone and skin and muscle. We are water, just like the trees, surrounded by bark and leaves. Everything is water. We are not earthlings, we are waterlings. And for whatever reason, we are killing, polluting, and privatizing, no, not just our source of life, but our very lives. Make no mistake,